Last week we talked about the new vegan brushes I have. If you missed that video, I strongly recommend you to check that video first, so you won't need to ask me what brush do I use in this video. Hi, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. The brush is the only thing between you and the paper. While the result of your painting mainly depends on you and your artistic core, good brush strokes make your painting fun to look at. It also gives your painting the character that's uniquely yours. If you've been following my channel for a while, you probably heard me say don't keep repeating your brush strokes. Repetitive brush stroke means you are going autopilot without thinking. And painting without much thought behind it doesn't look good. Of course, they're a happy accident, but that's just what they are. Accident. You can't always count on them. So learn what marks your brushes can make, when to use them, where to use them are very important. If visual language is the ability to interpret and simplify what you see, then your brushstrokes are the vocabularies for your visual language. Here are 4 things you need to learn how to master in order to have a good variety of brushstroke. Number 1. Check the wetness. While this is not directly related to the brushstroke, it does affect how it's going to look. If your brush is too wet, the brush you made will dry too light, or worse, it might start dripping if your paint tilted. You also won't be able to do dry brushing if your brush is too wet. On the other hand, if your brush is too dry, you might not be able to make the mark you want also because the dry brush doesn't go that far. So if you want to make a longer brushstroke, you do want some moisture in your mixture. I'm going to share with you how I simply manage the amount of moisture on my brush later. Number 2. Pressure. How much do you press your brush against the paper will dictate the size and the look of your brushstroke. If you press down harder, it's going to create a bigger mark. If you only touch it lightly with the tip of your brush, you will get a thin mark. This sounds elementary, but I've seen quite a few students painting with the same brushstroke over and over again. Now, you can make different sizes of brushstroke by using different sizes of brushes, but you can get a lot of variety out of a single brush, so always think about the shape you are going to paint before you switch brushes around, and make the most out of brushes you have. Number 3. Speed. In general, if you paint a mark at a faster speed, your viewer will look at it faster and sense more dynamic. If you paint a mark at a slower speed, your viewer will look at it a bit slower and more carefully. So think about what you are painting. Do you want the viewer to focus on it, or do you want the viewer to sense motion from it? These are all the things you should consider before you start to paint. When your brushstroke has both speed and direction, it becomes a vehicle for your viewer's eyes. It will lead them across the painting. Master watercolor artist Charles Reed once said, and I'll paraphrase here, your brushstrokes should have a starting point and a destination. This is especially important if you are painting a single shape with a single brushstroke. But even if you're doing a large area wash, the way you paint is still important since your brush can move the paint on the paper. And lastly, how many brushstrokes? This is the most important things to consider if you want a good looking loose painting. How do you achieve the look you are going for with the least amount of brushstroke? This really relates to your ability to use your visual language. Imagine you are reading a novel or watching a movie. The best ones are usually the ones that know how to present a story in an intriguing way. It gives you just enough detail to get you excited, but leave out enough for you to want it more. Don't overpaint your painting with needless brushworks. Even if your brushwork is masterful, too much of anything is never good. Okay, let's do some practice and see it in action. And in the end, I will be painting a full painting and show you how I use brushstrokes in context. Before we continue, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to this channel and hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next video. So for this exercise, I suggest you to use cheaper paper or the back of your failed painting, which I have a lot, so you won't be wasting good paper. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so let's do some practice with the brush stroke. First, what I want to mention is that you want to use a paper that is at least cold press. Cold press to rough will allow you to have some interesting textures. So I'm going to start by using my number 14 Escoda Ultimo and load my brush up with paint. I'm going to use again the beautiful cerulean blue from Mission Gold. Very, very beautiful color. I love it. Okay, so here on the top of the paper, I'm just going to paint a typical brush stroke. Okay, so I'm painting with the direction of my brush like these. Okay, so just press it down and paint. Okay, nice consistent wash. Okay, don't do this. Don't do this. See, when you're doing that, when you're dabbing like these, not only the brushstroke doesn't look good, you start to see a lot of bead gathering all over the place. Okay, so a nice consistent stroke, a nice confident stroke. Okay, even if you can build up your brushstroke like these, it's still not going to look as good. Okay, now these lines, okay, despite all the stabbing, these lines are all around the same thickness. Now I can use the tip of my brush and paint some thinner lines like that. Okay, you can get a lot of variety out of this single brush. A good brush will last you for a long time. Okay, you can get a little thin line if you press it down a little bit harder, it's starting to be thicker, and you lift it up a little bit more and a little bit thinner. Just look at that. It's a nice, beautiful shape here. A single brush, you can paint from thin to thick, and you can even do it at a single brush stroke from thick to thin. So don't keep repeating your brush stroke like these. Okay, this is not the only brush stroke you can make. Okay, now another thing that I want to share with you, which is very, very interesting, is that you can use the side of your brush. So instead of painting like these, you paint sideways like that. So like this. Okay, let me load up just a little bit more paint so you see a little bit better. Press it down and go sideways like this. Okay, now this allows you to paint some bigger mark because you're using more of the brush. But if you press it down a little bit more and you go to the side like that, you start to see a little bit more interesting texture like this. And if you paint a little bit faster, okay, you start to see more dry brush stroke like these. You start to see some sparkle like that. So this is really, really useful when you're painting something like in water or an ocean, things like that. So let's just do a quick example. So just paint it like that. You see that? You can see a little bit of sparkle here and there, and that is really useful when you're painting wants a little bit of texture, when you want a little bit of sparkle like water, lake or something like that. Okay, and then you can just starting to paint some ripples and things like that. Okay, it's very, very fun. Now this is the Mop Brush, and just some example. I'm going to switch a paper and switch to a smaller brush and see what we can do with it. Okay, now we have a smaller brush. This is number 10, Escoda Versatil, the synthetic Kolinsky brush. I'm gonna use a little bit darker color. I'll add some neutral tint to it. So this is a nice moist mixture. So the same thing, let's just start by doing a typical brush stroke like these. Okay, thinner brush, smaller brush, so you make finer lines. Again, no dabbing like these. Okay, even though if you're painting details, still don't do this. Okay, nice confident stroke. Now again, if you paint faster versus you paint a little bit slower, okay, the paint has more time to settle in. So fast brush mark is useful for conveying dynamic and speed and things like that, motion. And the same thing, this has a nice point, so you can use that to paint some nice details, some nice fine lines. Nice fine line. Okay, and a little bit of scribble, things like that.
Okay, electric pole. Just have a nice control. Hold your brush back. Okay, nice electric pole, things like that. Yeah. A little bit of wire. Okay, just with the tip of your brush, you can get a lot of stuff out of it. Get a tree trunk going on here, and then you can use the tip of your brush to get some tree branches. Okay, so it's all about controls. You go straight line and you stop a little bit, you turn. It's a little bit thicker lines. Okay, or you can start from thick to thin, some thicker stroke. Okay, and stop, and you can turn and lift. So you can do a lot of different type of brush stroke with this. Same thing, you can use the side of your brush and paint. Okay, you paint it and lift up like that. That is great for some grass, trees. Okay, if you want to paint some tree on it, just kind of press it down, turn it around like a mop. Use the texture of the paper and a little bit drier mixtures. You got a tree here already. You get tree, some bushes, some grass. Look at that. Okay, maybe some more tree back there. Just let it dance on your paper. Now, if you do want a little bit more control, then you can hold it way in and paint something. So usually when I'm painting figures, something that requires a little bit more control and precision, then I will hold my brush a little bit closer to the tip. But for the most part, you don't need to hold your brush that close to the tip. So something a little bit more controlled. But generally, you want to hold your brush back a little bit so it stays a little bit loose. A lot of you guys want a loose painting. One of the ways to achieve that is to hold your brush back a little bit more, so your brush just do a little bit more work. And obviously, if you have a very dry mixture, you get more dry brush mark like these. Okay, it runs out a lot sooner. Very, very different. It's darker, but it's also thicker. So to recap a little bit, your mixture makes a difference, but also your pressure, how hard you press your brush, will also change the shape of your brush stroke from thick to thin, and your speed. Okay, this is going to look different than this. So all of this will affect how your brush stroke is going to look, right? Your mixtures, your pressure, how fast your speed, is it slow, is it fast, and the direction, okay, where the form is. Like when you're doing a tree, you don't want to just do that. Okay, sometimes you want a little bit of direction. You want to change your direction. Okay, just to look a little bit more organic. And then sometimes you use the side of your brush instead of just using the tip of your brush. Okay, get a lot out of your brush. That's what I'm talking about.
I hope that was helpful. The main point is to be creative with the way you use your brush, so make the most out of them. Okay, I'm going to do a painting of this photo. I think it is important to see it in context. The brushstrokes are like vocabularies to your visual language, so how to use them is very important. Okay, let's do it. So for this painting, I started a value study first as well. Value study has become a very important part of the process for me, not for every painting but for some of the scenery paintings. And the reason is that it can give me a very clear vision of what I'm going to do with this painting. It helps me to figure out the big shape of the painting, so that also gives me a huge confidence boost before I start the final color painting. So from the first wash of this value study, you can see that I group all the trees in the background together and connect that to the shadow of the roof, and also connect that to the tree in the middle ground. and that middle ground tree connect to the shadow of the foreground. So everything connects together into a nice, simple composition. And the house that's in the light pops quite a bit, give it a nice sense of lighting. So the value study becomes the map of my final color painting. And here I start my bigger color version of the painting. I skip the drawing because it's a very simple drawing. But during the drawing phase, you do want to start to think about the type of brushstroke you want to make, especially for things like the middle ground tree. And I wet the painting with this sponge and pre-mix some colors that I'm going to use for the first wash. So the sky color, and as I approach the haze, it has a little bit more of a alizarin crimson, and then warm colors, some green colors. So here I start a first wash with the sky, nice blue there. And as I approach to the tree, I start to paint the color of the tree in. And once again, the first wash, light and atmosphere. So all I'm doing is painting the color of the light. So including the house. I don't plan to keep anything white because it is around the sunset color. The direct sunlight has a little bit of warmth to it. So the house is not white. It has a little bit of warm tint to it. So I just paint the colors of the tree and now down to the grass. Finish that wash rapidly. You don't want your wash to be dry. When you're doing this, you want to paint it and finish that in one go. Again, the first wash is all about light and atmosphere, so you're not trying to define anything specifically. Even for the tree, if the color blooms out a little bit more than what you're planning for, it is okay. It's just the light. When the wash is dry, you get to define the shape of the tree. Now while I'm waiting for the first wash to dry, I start to pre-mix the color for the second wash. Now the wash is a little bit damp, so I can use a little bit drier mixture to start painting the tree. Now look at how I use my big mop brush. Just because it is a huge brush doesn't mean I cannot use it to make some delicate, tiny little shapes. So places like the tip and the edge of the trees, where you need a little bit of details, I can just use the tip of my mop brush and do that. And varying your brushstroke a little bit. Like I said, you don't want to repeating your brushstroke over and over again. You want every brushstroke to feel deliberate. So I'm painting all the background trees all together at once so that it becomes a big shape. And if you feel your wash is drying a little bit too early, you can spray a little bit of water on it. It will keep it moist just for a little bit longer, and it will also give you a little bit of the texture. So something like a tree will be really beneficial from a little bit of spraying. So I'm continuing my wash to the left. The color turns a little bit cooler and a tiny little bit darker. Even though they're the same value grouping, I can do a little bit of wet on wet already to define the form a little bit. While it is still wet, I can have some soft transitions on the shadow side. And make sure your mixture is even drier than before. Now I'm connecting the shape to the shadow casting by the roof on the house, so they're part of this shape. And this wash is starting to dry, so I'm trying to wrap it up. So I give the bottom of the trees a little bit flatter bottom. And while it still has a little bit of dampness in it, I add a little bit more warm color in the middle. So the brushes I use are 2 Escoda Ultimo and 2 Escoda Versatil. Those are the synthetic brushes that I talked about last week. So I'm using Escoda Versatil to paint some delicate tree branches on the left. And here I'm painting the tree that is in the middle ground. This tree is an important shape, so I'm slowing down just a little bit to really try to capture the shape. And it is okay when you slow down in your brushstroke. Like I said, when you paint a slower mark, your viewer will look at it a little bit slower and a little bit more carefully. So now I'm using the tip of my brush and paint the branches. Think about where you want to go from thick to thin. You can use the tip of your brush and you press down just a little bit to make it thicker. It's like calligraphy. You press, you drag, pause, turn, and lift. Especially dry dead tree like these, those branches become a very important part of the painting. It's a good place to show a variety of different brushstroke. There's so many branches and stuff in the background on the left, so I'm just dry brushing it. I'm just scrubbing it very lightly on the paper, just to have that fuzziness on the left that suggests different branches and leaves and things like that. Here I'm adding a little bit of color on the roof and give it some color for the handrails in the second floor balcony. And now it's time to do the big cast shadow here in the foreground and a little bit in the back. I do left a little bit more light, pocket of light in the middle, just so that I can connect the light shape a little bit better. So I'm using a big mop brush. So for a little bit more detail part, I use the tip. But if I want bigger shadow shape, I'm just pressing it down a little bit harder and make a bigger shape. But again, keep your brushstroke nice and clean. Don't keep dabbing on it. This is actually a small park near my home, and I wanted to do this painting because it's a very beautiful lighting when I took that photo. And with the virus outbreak right now, most people stay at home a little bit more, and it makes us appreciate things that we have taken for granted. Simply like going to a park with your kids, gathering, go out for a meal with your friend, and things like that. So I hope this painting can capture that simple good times that we really enjoy in our daily life. So here I'm trying to finish my value study by adding some dark. So some dark shadow of the trees and the shadow on the middle ground tree, and the cast shadow I make it darker as well. So I go over it again. And the shadow that's casting by the house as well. So back to my color painting. I'm going to execute my plan. So mixing some dark colors and also reference from my value study where I'm going to paint my darks. So the trees obviously needs to have a little bit more darkness to it. The shadow side, they are very dark. So on the left we have the shadow side of the tree. The tree turns into the shadow, and they also cast a shadow on the trees on the right. And here we have the cast shadow casting by the house onto the trees. So this also makes the house pops up a little bit more. It just makes the whole thing a little bit more dimensional. So I try not to overdo it here. Even though there's a lot of little shapes, I try to connect them as much as possible. Some little loose shape that separates the trees a little bit. And I also soften some of the edges with a clean damp brush. It's very easy to start focusing on the detail because when you're focusing on the specific part of a photo, there's a lot of details and you want to start to mimicking those, and you start to dab a little bit too much in your painting. But keep your eyes on the value study and the big picture. The big shape is the most important thing, and you don't want to lose sight of that. So I am painting the figures. There are no figures in the photo because there's not a lot of people right now, but I still want to including some figures. So maybe a dad taking two kids out, playing catch with a football, things like that. It's very tiny little figures, so I don't need to spend a lot of time painting a lot of details. Just try to get the basic gesture in. Some dark details with the tip of the brush. windows, doors, helps to support your story, make your painting looks a little bit more sophisticated. But just a little bit of suggestion. Now I'm painting the big tree again on the shadow side of the tree. And I do want to leave a little bit of light to the left. So I'm darkening some of the branches. Some of the branches I will leave it a little bit lighter just to have a little bit more variation. I don't want to darken and paint over everything. I'm also adding a little bit more tree branches as needed. So some more suggestion on the background trees, and add a little bit more darkness in the distant trees. So adding some dark will anchor the whole painting down, and things will also come together, and the light is going to pop a little bit more as well. So the painting is pretty much done, but I feel the house and the grass feels a little bit too pale, so I decided to give it some warm tint and just glaze over them. So I glaze over the house, and I'm gonna start glaze over the light side of the grass just to make the sunlight a little bit warmer, feels a little bit more like a sunset scenery. So here is the finished painting. I hope you enjoyed this demo, and I hope you like this painting. This painting is put up on my website for sale along with some other paintings, and right now 100% of the profit I am going to donate to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So if you have a painting that you really like, now is a really good time to get it. I hope you enjoyed that demo and this video. I'm sure there's a lot more ways to do different brushstrokes out there, so it is important that you play with it yourself. I'm sure you can come up with more ways to paint. Still, good brushstroke won't make a painting good. You still need to work on your value, big shape, and more. If you got any other question about watercolor, leave me a comment down below. Please like this video and subscribe so I know you like this content. If you hate this video, hit the dislike button twice so you double the hate and it hurts me more. If you haven't, go to my website at cafewatercolor.com, download my Fast Track Watercolor PDF guide. I am Eric from Cafe Watercolor. See you next time.